A new day, a new story. In today's video, we will discuss the movie Wonka 2023. This movie tells the story of a young man who dreams of introducing his unique chocolate to the world. However, Wonka constantly faces challenges as his extraordinary chocolate makes other business people in the city envious. Can Wonka keep pushing forward against them? Without further ado, let's dive right into the story from the beginning. The movie begins with a young man named Wonka sailing across the ocean. After 7 years of wandering, Wonka decides to settle in a city this time to start his business. The city is grand, and the cost of living is quite high. Without realizing it, the man who initially had 12 coins now only has 6 coins left in his hands. In that city, Wonka also notices many chocolate shops. There is one empty store for rent across the street, and Wonka is determined to open his shop there one day. However, the journey isn't that smooth. Wonka doesn't even last a day in the city because he doesn't have enough money. He only has 2 coins left, one of which he gives to a homeless beggar, and the other falls into a drain when he tosses it. Feeling sad, Wonka wants to sleep on a bench by the roadside. But soon a man named Bleacher approaches him and says he can help him get a room to sleep for the night. Wonka then meets Mrs. Screwbit, who offers him a place to stay, with payment due the next day by 6 p.m. However, Wonka has to sign a contract. A young girl tries to warn him to read the fine print carefully, but Mrs. Screwbit quickly hoos her away. As a result, Wonka doesn't see the contract clearly and signs it right away. The next day, Wonka goes back to the city center to introduce his chocolate. He performs a magic trick, immediately drawing the attention of many people, including 3 major chocolate businessmen in the city who quickly call the police, seeing Wonka as a threat. The 3 businessmen join the crowd below, saying that Wonka's chocolate doesn't taste good after trying it, but that doesn't stop others from tasting it as well. Wonka's chocolate is very unique. People float in the air for a moment after eating it. A short while later, guards arrive to stop Wonka's show. The head of the guards says Wonka broke the law by disrupting other businesses and confiscates all the coins he earned. Desperate, Wonka begs for just 1 coin to pay his rent, and the guard finally gives it to him. As promised, Wonka pays Mrs. Screwbit 1 coin to settle his debt. However, he quickly realizes that Mrs. Screwbit has tricked him, as he now faces a total bill of 10,000 coins due to additional fees. Wonka is shocked, but he has no words to protest. To pay off the debt, Wonka is forced to work for 1 coin per day until it is fully repaid, and he is pushed down to the lower floor. In the basement, Wonka meets others trapped in the same situation. Abacus, Piper, Lottie, Larry, and the little girl from earlier named Noodle. They've all fallen into the same trap and are now forced to do laundry for Mrs. Screwbit's customers. The workers are provided with a place to live, but the conditions are terrible. The beds are broken, and even the drinking water is unhygienic. Noodle visits Wonka's room, hungry, and Wonka offers her some of his homemade chocolate. While preparing the chocolate, Wonka shares a story about his childhood with his mother. They weren't a wealthy family, but his mother always brought home 1 chocolate bean each week, and after a year, they had a whole bar of chocolate. Since it was collected so slowly, Wonka cherished the chocolate and thought it was the most delicious in the world. But his mother told him that the best chocolate could be found at Gallery's Gourmet, and Wonka dreamed of taking her there. She also promised that when the time came, she would reveal 1 more secret that made the chocolate so exquisite. Sadly, a few years later, his mother fell ill and passed away before they could fulfill that dream. But Wonka still holds on to her promise. A little while later, the chocolate is ready, and Wonka gives it to Noodle. Noodle finds it incredibly delicious, but worries she won't be able to go a day without chocolate anymore. Wonka tells her she can eat as much as she wants, as long as she helps him escape from this place. They begin brainstorming a way to outsmart Mrs. Screwbit, and eventually they come up with a great plan. Meanwhile, the 3 chocolate businessmen in town meet with the head of the guards. They believe Wonka's chocolate is too good, so they want to drive him out of town before he becomes a problem, especially since Wonka's chocolate is priced at just 1 coin, making it affordable for everyone. They try to bribe the chief, but he initially refuses. However, the businessmen keep increasing their offer, eventually offering 1,800 boxes of chocolate, and the chief finally agrees. Back with Wonka, he and Noodle plan to deceive Mrs. Screwbit. Noodle recalls that the only time Mrs. Screwbit is distracted is when a nobleman visits her shop, as she's always trying to impress them. So Noodle sketches a drawing and makes up a story that she found the sketch of a lost nobleman from the Bavarian family in a customer's pocket, and it looks strikingly similar to Mr. Bleacher. On the other side, Wonka manages to persuade Mr. Bleacher to flirt with Mrs. Screwbit by showing off his legs and tidying up his appearance. So that evening, Bleacher confidently begins charming Mrs. Screwbit. The plan works, and they finally have a little time to escape. They eventually manage to sneak out, but unfortunately, Wonka's bottle of chocolate has run out. Wonka explains that it was the work of the little green man who often appears in the middle of the night to finish off his chocolate, but Noodle finds the story very strange. Despite their debate, they must quickly make more chocolate to pay off the debt to Mrs. Screwbit. They need giraffe milk, so they plan to visit the zoo, as there's a giraffe there. The zoo is guarded by a single night watchman. Wonka gives him a special chocolate that makes him experience a rush of emotions before eventually falling asleep. Inside the zoo, they finally encounter a giraffe. Wonka milks it while asking Noodle how she got her name. Noodle isn't entirely sure, but her parents left her with a necklace bearing the letter N. Noodle hopes that one day she will find her birth parents and have a proper home. Wonka reassures her not to worry, promising that he will help her escape from Mrs. Screwbit's place. After a while, they manage to fill several bottles with giraffe milk, and now it's time to leave.
Thanks, Abigail.
When they return to the city, the head guard immediately confronts Wonka. He sternly warns Wonka not to try selling chocolate in the city again, or worse things will happen. That night, Wonka is deeply saddened. When he returns, he admits that he is indeed a chocolate seller. One of his friends there, Abacus, guesses that Wonka must have had many run-ins with the police. Abacus then shares what he knows. Abacus used to work as an accountant for Mr. Slugworth. One day while collecting a signature, he saw two separate accounting books. One was clean, and the other was for bribing officials and important people in the city using chocolate. It turns out the three businessmen monopolize the chocolate market, and the amount of chocolate they make is always reduced, with the leftovers stored in an underground bunker. The bunker is located beneath a church, and one of the access points is an underground elevator guarded by a pastor. Now Wonka understands why he has been constantly hindered. That night, Wonka calls for Noodle, but everyone else overhears their conversation. They all want to work together to find a way to outsmart the guards and keep selling chocolate. Piper says she knows the city's entire water system, which could serve as an escape route. Lottie used to work for a communications company, so she might be able to hijack the radio. Abacus could act as an accountant, and Larry could serve as a distraction since he can make strange noises. They all agree to work together. From that moment, Wonka secretly spreads his chocolate to the masses. More and more people begin talking about the deliciousness of Wonka's chocolate. Wonka always manages to escape through the underground water system, and the guards are clueless about his trick. After a while, the profits of the three businessmen plummet, and they pressure the head chief to stop Wonka immediately. Meanwhile, Wonka's business continues to soar, with profits doubling. One day when Wonka sells chocolate in public, he draws a huge crowd. The guards, anticipating this, finally figure out that Wonka has been escaping through the underground water tunnels. The chief, who has become very overweight from eating too much chocolate, orders his men to stand guard over the sewer entrances. Back to Wonka. He can't sleep that night. He sets a trap, knowing that the little green man will come.
Gotcha!
Wonka successfully captures the tiny figure. It wasn't his imagination after all. The small man is exactly as Wonka had pictured him. Not only that, but the little man can speak. He introduces himself as Oompa Loompa. Oompa Loompa had been stealing Wonka's chocolate because during one of Wonka's adventures, he had stolen cocoa beans from Loompa's island. As a result, Loompa was exiled by his people for failing to protect the beans. Loompa was ordered to repay 1,000 times the value of the cocoa beans before being allowed to return. Wonka apologizes for his actions and promises to repay the debt gradually. However, Loompa doesn't believe him and quickly escapes, hitting Wonka with a pan on his way out. The next morning, Wonka tells the others about the little green man, but they remain skeptical. However, that's not their main concern for now. Noodle has successfully rented Wonka's dream shop. Even though the shop is dusty and messy, Wonka is confident it will become the most successful chocolate store in the future. While Wonka is busy fixing up the shop, Mr. Slugworth and his two partners visit Mrs. Screwbit. Their plan is to poison Wonka's chocolate ingredients, hoping to scare away customers. That same night, Slugworth spots Noodle, and he is shocked to see that she is still alive. However, Slugworth assures his two partners that Noodle will not be a problem. After a few days, Wonka's shop is finally renovated. Because of his growing fame, the shop is immediately flooded with customers. The customers buy plenty of Wonka's chocolates, attracted by the many varieties available. But something terrible begins to happen once they start eating the chocolates. Their skin begins to change color, and thick, multicolored hair starts growing all over their bodies. Furious, the customers demand compensation and begin to destroy Wonka's shop, even setting it on fire. After the shop is ruined, the three businessmen arrive. They offer Wonka a large sum of money to clear the debts of his crew to Mrs. Screwbit. However, Wonka is forbidden from selling chocolate ever again and must leave the city. Wonka now feels utterly broken, as if his world is collapsing. With no other choice, he accepts their offer. The businessmen have already arranged a ship, and Wonka prepares to leave the city. At the docks, Mr. Slugworth meets with Wonka, shaking hands to bid farewell. As Wonka boards the ship, Oompa Loompa returns and tells him that all he needs to do is pay with one more jar of chocolate and their debt will be settled. Unfortunately, Wonka replies that he no longer makes chocolate. A moment later, Wonka notices something odd. He sees a mark on Mr. Slugworth's ring that looks exactly like Noodle's necklace. Worried that Noodle might be in danger, Wonka rushes to the front deck of the ship, only to discover that a dynamite bomb is about to explode. Wonka quickly jumps off the ship just in time, while Slugworth and the others believe he has perished. Abacus and the others, who had been imprisoned, are now free to leave. Mrs. Screwbit tells them that Wonka sacrificed his dream to secure their freedom. Everyone is released, except for Noodle. Mr. Slugworth didn't pay for her release. Instead, he paid to have her imprisoned for life. Noodle, now furious, insults Mrs. Screwbit, calling her an idiot for believing that Bleacher was a nobleman, when in fact it was all part of their fabricated story. As a result, Noodle is locked up. While Noodle is confined in a dark room, a voice calls to her from behind. It's Wonka. He has returned and frees Noodle as well. Now the five of them are determined to bring down the three businessmen. First, they need to find the secret underground room and retrieve a large green ledger that holds all records of the businessmen's income, expenses, and corrupt activities. The plan begins with Wonka stealing a giraffe from the zoo and bringing it to the church, causing all the priests there to panic and rush outside. The pastor calls the zoo to capture the escaped giraffe, but the call has been intercepted and redirected to Larry. Abacus pretends to be a zoo official and plans to lead the giraffe away, while inside, Wonka and Noodle prepare to sneak underground. In the underground room, there is one guard, but Wonka uses his usual trick, giving the guard some chocolate, which causes him to become overly emotional and dizzy before falling asleep. Wonka now has access to the secret room. He and Noodle quickly start searching for the green ledger, and after a while, Noodle finally finds it. However, their plan goes awry when Slugworth appears, armed with a gun, forcing them to hand over the ledger. At that moment, Wonka guesses that Noodle and Slugworth are related by blood. He deduced this from the fact that Noodle's necklace matched the ring on Slugworth's finger. Slugworth admits the truth. Noodle is the daughter of his late brother, Zibidee. Zibidee had fallen in love with a commoner, and they had a child together, Noodle, before he passed away. At that time, Noodle was gravely ill, and her mother, Dorothy, took her to see Slugworth for help. But Slugworth didn't care and abandoned her at a rundown laundromat owned by Mrs. Screwbit. Mrs. Screwbit misread the initial on the necklace, which was supposed to be a ZD for Zibidee, but she mistook it for an N, hence naming her Noodle. Now Noodle finally understands her family history and learns her mother's name, Dorothy. However, this revelation changes nothing. The evil businessmen are determined to eliminate Wonka and Noodle by drowning them in a chocolate tank. Before the valve is opened, Wonka makes one request, to give one jar of chocolate to the little orange man as he owes him one more jar. The businessmen agree, but, of course, break their promise and consume all the chocolate themselves. As the tank begins to fill, Wonka is on the brink of drowning and desperately calls for help. The only response comes from the little orange man. He appears just in time, rushing to the basement to stop the chocolate flow. Now Willie is safe and he quickly hands a ledger to the other officials. As a result, all the illegal activities are laid bare and the businessmen are arrested. But before they can be detained, they flee, only to find themselves soaring into the air after eating Wonka's chocolate. Wonka can finally run his business peacefully. In the final moments, Wonka sits alone, gazing at a chocolate made by his mother that he had been hesitant to eat. He unwraps it and discovers a secret message from her. The message reveals that the true secret of the recipe is not in the chocolate itself, but in sharing the joy of eating it with others. Afterward, Wonka shares that he has found Noodle's mother, who now works at the library. He takes Noodle there, and she feels a deep sense of relief and warmth upon finding her only family. Wonka also rents a large new place and plans to turn it into a chocolate factory. He offers the little orange man a partnership, and from that point on, the kingdom of Willy Wonka's chocolate continues to flourish. Thanks for watching. We're aiming to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to us. See you in the next video.